Jake Curtis is with us for the first hour. He's general counsel with the Institute for Reforming Government. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Tracy.
So are you celebrating tax day in any special way?
By filing my taxes late last night.
Wait till the last minute. All right. We love it. All right. Well, thanks for being here. And I know you do a ton of work. We're gonna talk about a wide range of topics today. But let's start with the Supreme Court race. You and I actually had a conversation before the election that ended up with Susan Crawford taking that spot. I think a lot of people expected that. But you did a lot of work trying to dissect what the ramifications would be if Susan Crawford won or if Brad Schimmel won. So what happened?
So certainly a lot to unpack there. So we did a lot of work at IRG. We essentially set up a new project. We call it the Court Watch Project. And we're going to continue to do that. And what we really tried to do was set ourselves apart by focusing on the cases that either have been already decided and could kind of almost from a precedential standpoint kind of set out the framework for future cases, or discuss cases that are currently being litigated and how the two different, I guess, philosophies would impact those cases. So we thought this was a unique thing to do, and we had a lot of success, and we're going to continue to do that because we obviously have a system where we elect our justices and our judges. But then come August, I think it's August 1st, they get sworn in. And in the case of our Supreme Court justices, they're on the court for 10 years. That's a long term. So they have a significant impact on the future of the judiciary and how these cases are handled. And so what we did was we kind of took them by categories. We looked at 1 week we would look at school choice or education freedom. Another week we would look at kind of the business climate. And while certainly there was some policy within those, we tried to kind of articulate what would a future court under Brad Schimmel look like, what would a future court under Susan Crawford look like. And obviously now we have the result. And so I think, frankly, our work is even more important because I think what we saw in this election, I'm not sure anybody was really thrilled with this election.
Because of all the money that was spent.
Ton of money. I think I was on with Steve early on in like January, and we talked about how this was going to be an expensive race. I don't know if we predicted that it was going to be the most expensive judicial race, not only in state history, in the nation's history. I mean, people need to realize $109 million is a historic election. Now, look, money is speech. There were a lot of people that were interested in Wisconsin and the future of this court. So I don't necessarily view it as a bad thing. People are interested in the future, and they want to ensure that we have a court that has a certain philosophy, one way or the other. I certainly tend to think that we want a court that's going to look at the law and not infuse their values, which is what the left has explicitly kind of run on in these races the last 4 or 5 years. So
now that the court is set and it has a progressive majority, there are issues like Act 10 and like school choice that are before the Supreme Court. You did a briefing on Act 10. What should we expect as voters and constituents?
Yeah, so great question. We're now beyond the rhetoric, and now this is getting real, so to speak.
Is this going to be overturned?
Well, Act 10 right now, just a quick refresher, there was a decision two decisions last July and December from Judge Frost in Dane County that effectively overturned Act 10 in its entirety. It was an equal protection claim that essentially the legislature didn't have a rational basis for essentially carving out certain sections of public safety. I happen to believe there was a rational basis. I don't think it's not just that I disagree with the policy outcome, and we can get to that in a second, but from a legal standpoint, I don't think it was a well-reasoned decision. I think it's very dangerous when you have courts looking at legislative determinations and essentially ignoring what the rationale was when they decided to enact the policy that they did. That's effectively what rational basis review is. Courts should bend over backwards to respect a legislative decision. And that's not what I think Judge Frost did in this situation. That decision is now on appeal to District 2, which is a more right-leaning Court of Appeals district based in Waukesha, there's a chance that that court overturns the Judge Frost decision, and then that will be appealed to the Supreme Court. So I think it's very likely that we are going to see Act 10 in front of this new progressive majority.
Well, and they've indicated that, or they actually, Susan Crawford did not indicate how she would vote on that. So I think, in her support, I think we have a lot to learn here. But the thing that really confuses me is the fact that this has already been tested, right? This was already before the court during the Scott Walker era, and it survived. So why was this such a big issue?
Another great question, because you're absolutely right. This issue, this policy kind of decision by the legislature has been tested from a judicial standpoint. There is Wisconsin Supreme Court precedent. There's Seventh Circuit precedent, right? So on the federal side, this actually went up to the Seventh Circuit. So multiple courts have looked at Act 10 and determined there was a rational basis for what the legislature did. If you recall, so going more to the policy side of it, well, why did the legislature carve out what they did? Because they didn't want certain parts of public safety going on strike. It was necessary. And again, you can agree or disagree with the policy, but there was a rationale for it.
Well, there's a lot to be seen here. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about school choice. Obviously, this is a big conversation. Some of it is tied to current legislation. Obviously, there's a lot of talking about this in the budget, and then voter ID that passed by overwhelming support by the voters in Wisconsin. 9:18. We're on with Jake Curtis. I'm Tracy Johnson on WTMJ. Welcome back on WTMJ, the final edition of the Political Power Hour for now. On with Jake Curtis. I'm Tracy Johnson in for Steve Scafidi, breaking down the kind of results and the outcome of the last Supreme Court election, where the liberal progressive majority is holding for now. 2026 whatever happens in 2026, it's still going to be a liberal progressive majority. And so all of these issues that you looked at, Jake, with the IRG, including Act 10, right to work, school choice, talk a little bit about what we can expect to see with regard to school choice. Obviously, this is a big discussion now with the state budget coming up, and now with the DPI secretary, all of that. What should we expect to see?
Yeah, so it's definitely something that I frankly am concerned that this court is going to revisit school choice. Remember, in 2023, I believe, there actually was a lawsuit that was brought by the Minocqua Brewing Company, PAC, I believe, a very progressive individual that owns that company. And look, he has every right to express his political opinion, but he's, I think, used that in a very aggressive manner and actually brought a challenge to school choice. It was a direct petition to the Supreme Court. Interestingly, the court denied it. In other words, they did not take up the lawsuit, and nothing came of it. Right, so there wasn't any subsequent litigation. That was something we were following closely, which to me was a very big tell that this court is going to make pretty political decisions, and that's disappointing. But I don't know how else you explain the decision there. I honestly think they did not want a challenge to school choice during this election, frankly, because school choice is very popular in Wisconsin. Right, and so you can kind of see we're pivoting from legal to policy, but that's the reality of how these cases are brought, and frankly, I think how this court is going to view them. That's a tough issue for the left because, frankly, you have a lot of urban minority families that maybe statistically vote more for the Democrat candidate over the Republican. But on this issue, there's overwhelming support. There's 59,000 kids in the state of Wisconsin that benefit from one of the three choice programs. Right? We have multi-choice, Racine choice, and then statewide. Almost 60,000 students, and then throw in the 30,000 homeschool students. Right, we're approaching almost 100,000 students that, in some form or another, the parents are exercising some education freedom. That's why I like to take it kind of to the next level. It's not just school choice, homeschool, virtual. It's just having options for parents.
I always was confused why the education funding is so political, but it certainly is. And we're seeing a lot of people, even before joint finance, testifying on behalf of, school choice or no school choice. It's like it should be about the kids. Jake, I want to get your take on the constitutional amendment, right, to require voter ID. This passed overwhelmingly, but you still did some research. You did a paper about this, about what could be at stake. Could this be challenged? I mean, Susan Crawford, who was just elected, was one of the parties involved in trying to stop voter ID. Was she not?
Absolutely. And I think in the previous segment, I think you had made an important point that when it came to kind of the political campaign statements, she was very careful to not express an opinion, but you're absolutely right. I mean, if you look at voter ID, if you look at Act 10 and some of these major reforms, she was very involved, which she had every right to be, right? I mean, I've been involved in strategic litigation. She was involved in strategic litigation, but to say that she was not going to express an opinion, it was kind of hard to juxtapose that with what she had done in her previous career, which was to represent, the League of Women Voters when it came to voter ID, which, as you pointed out, passed with 63% of the vote. In a year when the progressive candidate for justice did very well, you still had 63% of Wisconsinites support a very common sense reform, which I think there's some politics there we could unpack too. Is why do we have a situation where conservative reforms are passing overwhelmingly when directly placed on the ballot, and yet some conservative candidates are struggling?
Well, and maybe they're not really conservative ideals. They transcend politics, right? I mean, so if that's where you want to go with that,
right?
All right. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about more voter ID. Also, the real ID, right? I just actually went for my real ID and what's going to happen there. I mean, a lot of people don't know what's coming down the pike if they don't get this taken care of. Jay Curtis, and with me, Tracy Johnson on WTMJ. It's 9:25. I just took care of this myself, and that is getting the real ID. Jake, do you have the real ID, which allows you to fly using your ID?
Thanks to you, I just checked, and apparently I do.
You have the little star.
I have the star, apparently.
So by May 7th, everyone is required to have this real ID. And it is daunting for me in particular. I was married. I changed my name. You got to collect all these documents. So for women, it is challenging. But if you keep track of all your documents and you bring, verification of your address, all of that, it can be easily taken care of. And I have to actually say that my experience at the DMV was phenomenal. I went to the one on the south side on Chase Avenue. Everyone was very patient. They were very helpful. So it was a great experience. But, if you don't have that real ID, you are going to run into some problems at the airport unless you have a passport. So I don't want to freak everyone out, but this is going to be a big deal. And I know this isn't quite a tee up, but I mean, this can get into a whole nother discussion. I know, Jake, you'll come back and talk about the SAVE Act, because there are actually a lot of people who have questions about the SAVE Act and ID and all of that.
Right.
So, I mean, again, this is kind of my plug. Get your butt out there, get your real ID. But when we come back, we're going to talk about the governor's race for 2026. I mean, politics never sleeps. In fact, I do a lot with political fundraising and a PAC director, and I've been getting asked left and right, like fundraiser here, fundraiser there.
We're off to the races.
Off to the races. It never sleeps. News is next. Love that you have so many great resources. You do so much work and research, but you also kind of can talk about anything. That's what I love about having you on this show.
Well, thank you.
We kind of have our kind of set of topics.
Don't go pop culture though. That's where my kids always make fun of me. I have
maybe in the last segment we talked about it. We might go pop culture a little bit, but kind of carrying on this voter ID. All right, and I kind of teased it at the very end of the last segment. Is the real ID is now being required nationwide to get on an airplane, and that is going to be the official form of federal ID. But the questions around the SAVE Act, right? It's trying to secure voting and voter integrity. It's the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Eligibility Act. And recently they were saying that this is going to make it harder for women in particular to vote. What's the argument here? Does it have any ground? And is there any likelihood that this will be reversed?
Yeah. So first of all, what does the SAVE Act do? It basically requires proof of citizenship. So really, it's a citizenship requirement that we're going to set a federal standard because you had really varying applications of that requirement. So I think one of the criticisms I've heard is, well, it's already illegal. Well, yeah, but if you have this patchwork across the country, and this is what happens when you have federalism, right? You're going to have states that are going to apply it in different ways than maybe even Congress intended, or frankly, in some progressive states, not really enforce it at all. And so I think this is an attempt by Congress to, and again, we've been talking a lot about common sense reforms, requiring individuals to prove citizenship when they're voting is overwhelmingly supported by many people in this country. We just had the constitutional amendment last year, right, basically posing this very question to Wisconsin voters, and another example of whether you want to call it conservative or common sense. As a conservative, I think a lot of our reforms are common sense driven. At IRG, we talk about the kitchen table issues that people care about, and despite maybe what the left is trying to communicate, this is a very common sense reform. I mean, we're a sovereign nation. Therefore, the individuals that select our future leaders should have a citizenship status. And if they don't, they should not be able to vote. And when you really get into the weeds, you look at the ID. I mean, I've done election integrity efforts. We put our clerks, our election inspectors, frankly, in a tough spot when they're expected to take a license and see in very fine print that this is not to be used for voting. And then even if there's a dispute, right, that individual simply has to provide the last 4 digits of their social security number. And every time I've done trainings on election integrity, one of the questions we'll always get is, well, on the spot, right, when somebody's registering at their local municipality, they don't have the appropriate identification, they give the last 4 digits of their social security number, is that checked against any sort of database? And the answer is no, which then begs the question, well, what's preventing individuals from just making numbers up on the spot? And frankly, the answer is nothing. So I think this SAVE Act is an important reform. 4.6 million illegal immigrants came into the country under the Biden administration. 1.9 million got away. There are individuals here that could vote. And again, this isn't xenophobic. This isn't racist. This is common sense. Individuals should have a citizenship status in order to vote. I think this is a common sense reform.
Well, and there's been a lot of conversation about making it easier to gain citizenship, and I think there's still opportunity to do better there, and I think that's all part of the conversation. But you mentioned immigration, right? And this is all kind of tied together. I think generally people support immigration reform. The surprising thing to me, though, and you actually heard it when the El Salvadorian president was here yesterday talking with President Trump, they were talking about the immigration numbers and the fact that they have decreased so much in the last couple of months and weeks, something like 5,000 border crossings.
I've certainly talked about this issue a lot. I know Steve has had me on before. I think it's frankly one of the most underreported stories right now. And I get it. There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Trump is people may say it's a chaos presidency. I think he's a disruptor, right? He's bringing much needed reforms in some cases. When you look at immigration, again, it's border security is overwhelmingly supported by the American public. I think what's underreported is the fact that, and people will probably interpret this as a partisan statement. The reality is we have the numbers. You had I think, a manufactured border crisis during the Biden administration. When you had months, I think it was December of 2023, we, for the first time, approached 300,000 border encounters in a month. Right? That never occurred, at least statistically, as they were keeping those numbers. And then by mid-24, because President Biden had essentially issued his own executive order tightening the asylum process, even under the Biden administration, those numbers started to come down. And then we get the Trump administration, where, as you pointed out, border encounters are down to 5,000 to 7,000 a month. that was a manufactured crisis. And that was a real crisis. At IRG, we did a long report on the impact of local units of government. Nobody really in the country had done a report like that. Everybody's focused on the border and the national numbers, which are important. And then a few groups looked at big cities. We looked at little Whitewater in the grand scheme of things, a small municipality, and the impact to law enforcement, the impact to K-12. You put 20, 30 English as a second language learners in the classroom. That's going to be really hard for teachers to manage. And then just that there were, like I said, law enforcement issues. So this is a big issue. And I think what frankly upsets me is it was manufactured. It did not need to occur during the Biden administration. And I think this is one of President Trump's biggest successes so far in his first 100 days, is almost immediately stopping that flow so we can manage what's happening at the border.
Well, it was certainly one of the reasons I think he won the election is because his strong stance on immigration reform. And I remember hosting the show from time to time, especially when there were immigration bills before Congress and then all this fighting. People would say, oh, Congress needs to act. Congress needs to act. And what did President Trump say?
Enforce what's on the books.
Enforce what's on the books. And that's exactly what's happening. Some people might not like it so much, but hey, man, you got to make tough decisions. All right, when we come back, we will get to that discussion on the governor's race. Local businessman is forming an exploratory committee. I saw one of the other potential candidates on the news this morning. I mean, this governor's race has started. I'm on with Jake Curtis from IRG. I'm Tracy Johnson in for Steve Scafidi.
I've got a fantastic...
Jake Curtis from IRG in. So, conservative organization, we've talked about this, following the governor's race, right? The Republicans have kind of, I don't want to say struggled, but we struggled in statewide elections over the last couple of elections and sessions. They're now really trying to get this governor candidate right. We saw that Republican businessman Bill Berrien has formed an exploratory committee. What do you know about that? And what do you think are the opportunities and the optics going forward?
Sure. So a few points. First, you're absolutely right. Conservatives have struggled statewide. So since President Trump took office in 2017, Republicans have only won 4 out of 19 statewide races. Obviously, Senator Johnson was able to get reelected. President Trump in 24 winning the state's electoral college votes, and that's really been it. The Republican Party in Wisconsin has a lot of work to do, and the governor's race is going to be critical. I don't want us to forget about the Supreme Court race, right?
In 2026, but that's in spring, right?
So it's before the governor's race. And so, but yes, governor's race is going to be important. So we got to win the Supreme Court in 26. As you noted earlier, though, that's just to hold, right? It's 4-3 progressive with Susan Crawford kind of cementing that for the next 3 years. The next two, spring of 26, spring of 27, are Rebecca Bradley or Justice Rebecca Bradley and Justice Annette Ziegler, both conservatives. So the next two are just to essentially play defense and make sure it at least maintains a 4-3 conservative progressive split. And then in 2028 would be the first opportunity where the conservatives could again flip it back to a conservative majority. So I don't want us to forget about that race next spring. But then, yes, you're right. Fall of 26, a big race for governor. You're going to have attorney general, majorities in the legislature.
Midterms are at that time.
Midterms, so that's going to be a big test for President Trump and his administration. So, look, Wisconsin, we do politics really all year long at this point, and the reality is, I go to a lot of national conferences, talk to policy experts and things like that. Everybody's fascinated with Wisconsin. The reality is, I think it's fair to say we are the most critical swing state in the country. Ohio is now solidly red. Even states like Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia, they still have a right lean. If you're trying to identify the state that is truly split down the middle, and almost every race is competitive, right? The conservatives had a long run of success during the Walker era, and now the progressives are having success under the Evers era. But we're still, any election could be decided by 10, 20, 30 votes. So the governor's race is going to be huge. As you noted, there are already some candidates that are popping up. Bill Berrien successful businessman, former Navy SEAL. We don't have to get in the weeds, but basically setting up one of these PACs, a political action committee, is kind of like an exploratory committee at this stage. It's a first serious step to essentially assemble a team and to, I guess, explore. But I think when somebody does this, it indicates they are very serious about a race. Doesn't mean they're going to necessarily jump in, but it's a lead indicator that they are serious. Betsy Anke, I think is her name, is a tremendous political consultant that had success with Senator Johnson, President Trump. I believe he was her hire for that PAC. That is a serious move. And there are other names. County Executive for Washington County, Josh Schoeman, a friend of mine, great local leader. I don't think we can forget. Remember, we have Scott Walker, who came from Milwaukee County, so don't forget about local leaders. You have Congressman Tiffany from up north, Mary Felskowski from the state Senate. So some real leaders, some serious policy experts, with a proven track record. You look at somebody like Josh Schoeman, very successful county executive. And then you have kind of maybe that business track with Bill Berrien. Another name I've heard is Matt Newman from Newman Construction. Sure. There's some good names. I think some people that really could take the state in a different direction. And I'm just making sure I haven't missed any. Oh, the two other names that I think are interesting: Senator Teston from Central Wisconsin. That's another state legislator. So you may have a kind of a state legislator lane with Senators Felskowski and Teston. And then you have, again, in that business lane, Eric Hovde is still out there, right? And
you think that's a possibility?
I guess there's people who really, really know the inside game. I'm not that kind of embedded. I don't know kind of where his head's at. He ran a very strong Senate race against an entrenched incumbent that had a lot of money on her side. And so I mean, if he's going to think about it, he should be taken seriously. So, I mean, there are some very serious names on this list.
Well, and what I think is interesting when we talk about Bill Berrien is, the conversation about how much money this actually takes. I mean, you talk about business people getting involved in this. I mean, he's investing a lot of money to try to say, is this really worth the investment? What I hope, though, is that the Republican Party can kind of line up behind a candidate. I think when we saw with Michaels and Clayfish, we saw the party divided. And that was, I think, the reason that they lost in that election, is because they split the party, they split the thinking. Get unified and line up so that we can actually have a real conversation about the ideals. Because all indications point to the fact that Evers is going to run again, don't they?
I think he's running again. I always, in a situation like this, I look at kind of the counter argument. What would be the reason for him not to run? Mm-hmm. And right. I can't assuming he's still healthy, and the Dems have a significant, I think, advantage with respect to infrastructure right now. Why not?
Yeah.
Why would he not? And so the reality is Republicans, I think, are going to be running against a very entrenched governor, and they're going to have the infrastructure and money to do that.
Well, the race starts now. Jay Curtis from IRG. We'll be back with more after the break. All right, we're going to wrap the first hour. Jay Curtis, thanks for being with us. But you wanted to give a special shout out, because last time we were on, we talked about basketball and your connection to some of the Final Four contenders.
Just a quick shout out, Con Knipple, Wisconsin Lutheran High School graduate. That's where my wife and I went, had an outstanding performance in the NCAA tournament. So it's just really cool to see Wisconsin kids go to that sort of stage. And I mean, he was honestly one of the most impactful players in the tournament. Unfortunately, they fell to Houston, but that's just a great story. Local kid, he wants to come back to Wisconsin after he probably has this amazing NBA career. So. And there were other stories. I think Iowa State had a couple of Wisconsin players. So if you like basketball, if you like the NCAA tournament, a lot of great Wisconsin connections.
Yeah, he was an inspiration for my son. My son is 14, and he was like, "Oh man, I'm pulling for so the local kids." So.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks for being with us. Stick around. We've got Steve Boss in studio for the next hour of the Political Power Hour. We'll be back after the break.